Hey guys, welcome to episode 38 of Reconstructing Cave Story. In this episode, we're going to be working out some projectile bat collisions. So, our main problem is our projectile should collide with the bat, and the projectile needs to have a reaction, which is to die, and the bat needs to have a reaction, which is to take damage and possibly die. And so, a sub problem we have is where do we actually do this collision check? So, I'm just going to tell you now that I'm going to do the collision check in game update. Some alternatives, we could do it in the enemy class, the first cave bat, we could pass in the projectiles to there. And then we could also do it in the projectile class, we could pass the enemies into there. We could, and I probably will later, make a new class namespace to handle collisions just to separate the logic. But for me, I thought since both the bat and the projectile have a reaction, like to a collision, I thought it made the most sense to put it in the most neutral spot, which is the game update. So neutral meaning it's like kind of, central territory where both the bat and the projectile would meet. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean neutral, like, I don't know, I'm thinking about dodgeball where you have the neutral zone in the center and like you got two teams on the other side. Anyway, that's a weird analogy, but that's what I was thinking. So since we're going to do our collision check in game update, we're going to need either to make our private class, which our private projectile class, public so that the game class can see it, or we can just make a projectile interface, which is what we're going to do because this is way easier and way more practical when we have other kinds of projectiles later. So for now, it's going to need two things: collision rectangle and contact damage. And this collision rectangle is just what we defined in the last episode, and this contact damage is what the amount of damage a projectile will cause to an enemy. So like the first level will cause 1 damage, second level causes 2, and third level causes 4 damage. But yeah, we will implement that in our projectile interface, implement it in the projectile class, and declare it in the interface. And then we're also going to need a way of getting all the projectiles that our player has, and this is just going to return a vector projectiles, just a list to iterate over, and it's only going to return the ones that are alive. So yeah, let's get started. So let's start by creating a projectile interface. I'll add a new item, header file, just call it projectile.h. And we'll do our header guards. Struct projectile, and then it's going to return a rectangle for collision rectangle. Let's make it const and equal to 0. So this will be virtual and pure. So virtual meaning it's going to be overridden by base class, and pure meaning it has no implementation. So let's include rectangle. And the other thing we're going to need is to return a units of HP for contact damage. Again, virtual because it's going to be overridden, and pure because it has no implementation. And let's include units too. Although I think rectangle already includes units, but we can include it anyway. Yeah, so now let's make sure our polar star.h, our projectile inherits from this public projectile, from this projectile interface, I mean. So let's include projectile, and should just need to do public. And I think since this is called projectile, I'm going to have to look at the global scope, so you can just do that by doing projectile, and yeah, there it is. And now we have this collision rectangle, which we need to return in our public area so that we can use it. And we also need to define our contact damage, so I'll copy that in. For this, I'm just going to return 1 and we'll work out multiple levels later. So return 1. And I'll just build, make sure that everything's still working out okay. I like to build a lot. It helps me catch bugs early on. So like every time I make what I think is an interesting change, I build. So player.h and player.cc, right? Yeah. So I need to return. I need a get projectiles method so that we can actually iterate over our projectiles. So let's do that below at the end. It'll be a standard vector of projectile, so let's include projectile. Oh, actually, since we have boost shared pointers to projectiles, I'm going to make it a boost shared pointer to projectile, so we can just forward declare it. Standard vector boost shared pointer to projectile, and we'll call it get projectiles. And it won't be const because it's going to be changing the projectiles, but I will just implement it right here as returning polar star dot get projectiles, and have polar star actually implement it. So let's open polar star again. Oops. So let's copy and paste this. I might need to include vector, so I'll kind of include vector. And again, it's not going to be const, but we should, I'm just going to implement it in the CC file, I think, because it's like a couple lines long. So everything that you define in the header file gets inlined or might get inlined, but if it's more than a couple lines, it probably won't get uplined. It probably won't get inlined. I'll do it below start fire, I guess. Yeah, right here. Polar star, and we'll make a vector to put these in and then return it. Call it projectiles and return it. Now let's add some stuff to it. What are you not happy about? I think I need to, yeah, sorry, I need to scope these out. Yeah, it gets kind of confusing when you have classes that are named the same, but since this one's inside of this polar star namespace, it's technically a different class than this one that's in the global namespace, so that's why I got to put the colons in. And I think I have to put a space in here too. Oh man. I should just name something different. Okay, so let's add to our projectiles. So if projectile A is existing, we can add it to projectiles. So projectiles dot pushback projectile A. And same thing with B. All right, I'm going to build, make sure everything is happy, especially with this : projectile business. And it is happy. Now let's go into our game class and iterate over these projectiles so that we can check for collisions. Woo! So I'll go to game CC and right here, how about before we do our player bat collision, let's do our bat. So if bat dot, actually I don't want to use the damage rectangle because that's too small. I want to use its collision rectangle, but I don't know if I defined that yet. So let's define that next. So first give bat dot h, and Yeah, its damage rectangle. See, its damage rectangle is just a single point in the middle, but its collision rectangle for like when it's so for like if we are seeing if a bullet is colliding with it is much bigger. So collision rectangle, or yeah, call it that. Tile to game 1. Yeah. So if let's loop over all of our projectiles. So standard vector of boost shared pointer to projectile. We don't need to scope it in anymore, or scope it out, I guess. Projectiles. Let's initialize it with player get projectiles, and then loop over it. So for size t I equals 0, I is less than projectiles dot size plus I. Then we can do our check. So if bat collision rectangle instead of our damage rectangle collides with let's see, projectiles sub I, get collision rectangle, printf collision occurred, and let's just print out our contact damage. Projectile sub I. Let's see, I think I'm missing a parenthesis. There we go. So yeah, let's just see, let's build it and run it and see if it works. So build succeeded, I'm happy with that. And I'll bring over the console so we can see what it's saying. Dang, look at that. It's colliding with a bat. Can't see it anymore because it's not like changing. It doesn't look any different in the console. But let's have it also delete our projectile while we're here. So let's add something to our projectile interface so that we can do this. And look at it here. Where is projectile.h? And this is just going to be, it's not going to be a const method, but it's going to be called, and it's not going to return anything either. So let's call it disincorporate. No, that's not. Destroy, disincorporate, collides with enemy, collide with enemy. Yeah, collide with enemy, that's good enough. So I'll go into our polarstar.h and implement this. And how are we going to implement this? Well, we want to make it so our update will return false. So I'm going to keep track of a Boolean alive. So let's implement it as setting alive to be false. And make another change, another couple changes while we're here. So add in a bool alive. We should also remember to initialize it. Boolerstar.cc. Way down here. Further, okay, here. So we'll default alive to true. Hopefully it starts out as alive. And then here in our update method, we'll return not alive. We'll return alive, and the offset is less than k projectile max offset. So this way, if alive is false, then we'll just short circuit this and return false. Let's see. Okay, I think that's it. All we need to do is in our game.cc call projectiles sub I collide with enemy, and build and run to make sure it all works. Okay, missing a semicolon. This should be alive equals false. That's silly. Okay, I'll bring them both over so we can look at it. Yes! So it should just be once for every time we shoot. So I'm very happy with how this turned out. I'm going to do one more thing, and that is to have the bat take damage. So this will be a void take damage, units of HP, damage, and it's right now just going to print out that statement I was printing out in here, but I'm just kind of moving it into the right spot. And instead of contact damage, it's going to be just damage. And inside of game.cc, let's call this method bat take damage, giving it our projectiles damage. And make sure it does the same thing. Okay, let's see. Look at that. Isn't that so beautiful? Yes, the answer is yes, it is. It is very beautiful. So coming up next, we're going to give our bat some damage text, and that's going to be a little bit trickier than you might think at first. So yeah, that might be a couple episodes long, but this is it for now in this episode, and thanks for watching, guys. Happy developing.